In this video, we're going to talk about Steve Jobs' family, his wife, his kids, and his parents. Let's jump right in. Steve Jobs was one of the most influential people in technology history, but what many people don't know is that he had a complicated relationship with his birth parents, adoptive parents, and his own children. In fact, his story is so strange that it could be mistaken for one of his fictional characters in Toy Story. He was born in San Francisco General Hospital on February 24, 1955, but he wasn't exactly wanted. His birth mother was a single, 23-year-old from an upper-middle-class family who had recently graduated from university. She felt that she wasn't ready to raise a baby, and her parents were unsupportive at all. So she gave the baby up for adoption without telling anybody. Meanwhile, Steve Jobs' adoptive parents were a working-class couple who already had 3 children of their own. They had no idea that they were adopting a baby boy when they went into the hospital. Jobs grew up knowing that he was adopted, but it wasn't until he was older that he began to look for his biological relatives. When he was 26 years old, he tracked down his birth mother through the help of an adoption agency. He met her and learned that she was married and had 2 more children. However, she didn't tell him much else about himself or anything about his biological father. This meant that for a long time, Steve Jobs had very little knowledge about his paternal side of the family, or any of his extended family. It was only later that Jobs discovered that his biological father was a graduate student who was also up for adoption, and then he decided to look for him too.
Being successful, unquote, in the eyes of society and the ones that didn't. Oftentimes, it's the ones that are successful loved what they did so they could persevere, when it got really tough. And the ones that didn't love it quit because they're sane, right? Who would want to put up with this stuff if you don't love it? So it's a lot of hard work and it's a lot of worrying constantly. And if you don't love it, you're going to fail.
Jobs found out that his dad had moved to Switzerland after finishing his PhD and become a professor at a university there. But once again, there was a problem. Steve Jobs didn't speak German, and neither did his dad, so communication was difficult. Nevertheless, Jobs was determined to meet his father, and eventually he succeeded. It wasn't until he was in his 30s that he formed a relationship with his biological father, but he never developed a relationship with his mother or any other paternal relatives. After graduating from college, Jobs became friends with another young man named Steve Wozniak. The two became close friends, and together they started a company called Apple Computer Inc. Wozniak was the brains behind the company's first product, the Apple I Personal Computer Kit. However, Jobs played an important role in convincing investors to back the project. With the money they raised, the pair hired a few employees and got to work on developing the next generation of computers. While they were successful at first, the company soon ran into trouble. The Apple II computer they developed was innovative, but it was also extremely expensive. As a result, the company lost money for several years while trying to stay afloat. During this time, Jobs' personal life was also in shambles. He was divorced and raising a young daughter on his own. Things seemed to be looking up when Apple finally became profitable in 1980. However, Jobs' ego and inability to work with others soon caused him to be pushed out of the company he started. After leaving Apple, Jobs founded a new company called Next. Unfortunately, this company was not as successful as his first venture, and it too eventually lost money. At this point, Jobs' career was at risk of going down the tubes. He needed something to turn things around quickly. If he wanted to make a comeback in the tech industry, his big break came when Apple purchased Next in 1997 and brought him back as CEO over the next decade. Jobs helped turn Apple into one of the most valuable brands in the world. Under his leadership, Apple released groundbreaking products such as the iMac, iPod, iPhone, and iPad. Jobs was also responsible for expanding Apple's reach into new markets outside of North America. Unfortunately, Steve Jobs died in October 2011 at the age of 56 after a long battle with pancreatic cancer. He left behind a legacy of innovation and a fortune that currently sits at over $13 billion. Now, let's talk about Steve Jobs' wife and children. Steve Jobs was married twice during his lifetime. His first marriage was to a woman named Lisa Brennan Jobs. The couple had one daughter together named Eve Jobs. After getting divorced, he married a woman named Laurene Powell. They had 2 children together, a son named Reed and a daughter named Erin. So how are these people related to Steve Jobs? Well, let me break it down for you. Lisa Brennan Jobs was the wife of Steve Jobs. This means that she was the stepmother of Eve Jobs, his daughter, with his second wife. After divorcing Lisa, Steve Jobs married Laurene Powell. This made her the stepmother of Reed and Erin Jobs, his children with his first wife. Hopefully, I haven't confused you too much. Here's a quick breakdown of their family tree. Steve Jobs' biological parents are unknown. He has an older sister named Patty Jobs and a younger brother named Michael Jobs. Both of them were adopted as well and have their own families. On the other side of the family tree is Steve Jobs' adoptive parents. Paul Jobs was a machinist, and Clara Jobs was a legal secretary. They had a son named Steve Jobs and a daughter named Patricia. After they died, Steve Jobs' niece and nephew inherited their estate in Silicon Valley. As for Steve Jobs' own children, Lisa Brennan Jobs is now a magazine writer, and Eve Jobs is a model and equestrian. Reed Jobs is studying at Duke University, and Erin Jobs is attending Brown University. All 3 of Steve Jobs' children are estranged from their father's family. None of them have any contact with their grandparents, aunts, or uncles. This may seem like a strange thing to do, but it's actually quite common among the children of famous people. It's not uncommon for celebrity kids to try to distance themselves from their famous parents. This is often done in order to avoid the pressures of growing up in the public eye. As you can imagine, being the child of a famous person comes with its fair share of challenges. For starters, you're constantly in the public eye. Every move you make is scrutinized by the media, and every decision you make is analyzed by your parents' fans. This can be especially challenging during adolescence when you're still figuring out who you are and what you want to do in life. In addition to the pressure to live up to your parents' legacy, you also have to deal with the constant fear that you will be compared to them. No matter what you do, you will always be seen as your parents' child. And that can be a good thing or a bad thing. It all depends on how you look at it. Some celebrity kids are able to use their famous last name to their advantage. They leverage the attention and opportunities that come their way and go on to build successful careers. Others, however, choose to walk away from the spotlight. They try to live as normal a life as possible and avoid the pitfalls of growing up in the public eye, regardless of how they handle it. One thing is for sure, being the child of a celebrity is never easy. Now, let's take a look at some interesting facts about Steve Jobs' family. Steve Jobs was given away for adoption because his birth mother was unwed and her parents were disapproving. Jobs was raised by a working-class family who had 3 other children. Jobs changed his last name to Gates after being inspired by a biology class. He tracked down his biological mother when he was 26 years old. Jobs had no contact with any of his biological relatives on his father's side. He formed a close bond with his adoptive father, who taught him how to fix machines. Jobs had a complicated relationship with his adoptive mother, which eventually led him to cut her out of his life. Asterisk. He had 3 children during his lifetime. All 3 of them are estranged from their father's family. After Steve Jobs died, his widow donated hundreds of millions of dollars to charity. I hope you enjoyed learning about Steve Jobs' family. If you did, please let me know in the comments below. And if you'd like to learn more about him, check out the playlist of videos in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.